G'day and welcome to another episode of the HSEQ Leaders podcast. It's the last one of the year. It's the last one. We're recording this. I mean, it'll probably hit the internets sometime in January, but we're recording this on the 19th, so just before the Christmas break, the 19th of December. And it's a special edition podcast because one, if I'm going to talk about me, it's special because it's the first one I'm doing in a new office and behind me if you're watching online. And secondly, I'm joined with a special guest, Craig Howell. I'm going to, I guess, let Craig introduce himself, but over to you, Craig. Welcome on board.
Yeah, hi. Thanks very much, John. So yeah, it's a privilege. I have a little bit of imposter syndrome, I think. This is a little bit different, I think, from your normal ones, and I guess we'll find out more about it. But my name's Craig Howell. I'm the principal consultant for Complete Management Systems, and I am the director of that company as well. Thanks very much, John.
No worries, mate. And look, there's no imposter syndrome around, mate. I'm really glad to have you on, and I think we're going to dive through our usual questions, and we'll dive into that. But a real big focus here and a lot of value I think it can be brought to people that listen in the network is that very excitingly you've gone off, what was it, 12 months, 2 years ago now, on your own. Craig, is that correct?
Yeah, 12 months. We're right on 12 months now.
There you go. And started up your own consultancy. And a lot of people talk about starting up consultancies and going into HSE consultancies. We've talked about the pros and the cons and the challenges and the wins and all of that. And I guess sharing a bit of a light on that is something that we're probably going to dive into today.
Yes, fantastic.
Before we do, though, let's do the pre-ramble. Let's give some context to people. So tell us the cliff notes, as I say, the short story, Craig. I don't need the high
short story.
And then, but the short story of your career and who you are and where you got to where you are today, I should say.
Okay. I'll try and keep it short. So I did a lot of schooling remotely. Finished year 12 in Alice Springs in Northern Territory, great place. Nothing to write home about. Look, all my school reports, and this will have some context, all my school reports says has potential, needs to employ himself. Moved to Perth as a 17-year-old, started an apprenticeship as a locksmith. And then 5 years later, I joined the Air Force, the Royal Australian Air Force in '96 as an aircraft structural technician. Again, another trade. Completed 12 years in the Air Force, mainly on the East Coast. Saw most of Australia, lots of parts of the world, in some great places and some not so great places. I learned a lot about myself, had some unbelievable experiences that money just can't buy. I guess an example is flying in all different types of aircraft, including right-hand seat of an F-111 in Malaysia in 2005. And that's a two-seat fighter bomber. I left the Air Force in 2007 and spent some years in Perth working around the place before making the move into resource sectors. So I guess that there's a lot of people that work in the resource sectors in WA, and as you have a significant part of that, John.
Mining or mining adjacent, as we like to say.
Yes.
Okay. It's the biggest show in town, right?
Yes, it is. Worked on various sites around WA, various rosters, and I had to start off as a drill hole surveyor to get into the resource sectors, which is an interesting one, and then before gaining a full-time safety or HSE role, and spent years on various sites around the Pilbara, Goldfields, etc. I made the move to Queensland again in 2014 to get into oil and gas. So that was onshore oil and gas. And then due to some downturn in pricing after about a year, I was looking for work again. And that was a real pivotal moment, I think, in my career, was that I had a diploma in OH&S, and I was fighting against a lot of people at that particular time in Queensland who were degree qualified. So that started me down that journey of a university education as a 40 in my early 40s. I never ever thought I would go through uni being a tradie. But I spent the next 5 or so years.
Sorry, Craig,
working.
Just to interrupt.
Yeah, you're right.
There.
Yep.
That was back in 2014, 2015, around then. Like you were over in Queensland.
Yeah.
Really, really interesting on that. I mean, I see that from a hiring point of view. The East Coast degrees it's interesting you said that's 10 years ago, right? Because
Yeah.
it's not a prerequisite often of the time in Western Australia for safety, but it certainly is over east, and it's only getting more so. So interesting that you
Really?
identified
Okay.
that 10 years ago, you know. But
Yeah.
sorry to cut you off.
And that was my experience, right? So I'd apply for jobs, and if I managed to get some feedback, or I was talking to other people who were looking for work, and I'd ask them about their education and skills and qualifications, whatever, and that was what I found. And
Mm,
so for me, that was a real turning moment of, hey, I need to make some decisions here. And I had to, obviously, I was the main breadwinner, so with my family, so I had to work at the same time as well as study. And so 5 or 6 years later, I enjoyed it so much, I ended up with a master's in OHS and environmental management. And that was while I was doing some FIFO roles and corporate roles. But it was one of the best things I ever did professionally. I learned so much about how what I was learning was transferred straight into my professional life. And I guess that's the advantage of working and studying, is that all of your assignments and projects are things that you do day to day. That's the whole point of it, if you're
mm.
working in that same field. So yeah, that was fantastic. And I guess, why do I tell you about the school and the work before becoming a safety practitioner and the professional is, for me, it gives you a very good context on understanding a person's background. So I come from that trade background, working with my hands in workshops, a lot of manual handling, seeing those types of things from that side before you then have to go in as a safety professional and be able to influence and talk to people and engage with people. That's a key part of being a safety professional and establishing relationships. So that, I guess, just to give you the context
Mm.
about why. So yeah.
Not all just uni, mate.
No, that's
But
right. Yeah.
um, there's a few things there, and I guess the one question I always ask is why then? Why safety coming from a trade background, from Air Force? I mean, why safety? What was the motivation that attracted you to it to then go and do a degree and a master's?
Yeah, sure. So I guess that, how did I get into safety, or why was the attraction to safety? This again has a little bit of a story to it. So I was in the Air Force as a corporal aircraft structural technician. I was at the time posted in Amberley in Brisbane, working on F-111 aircraft. I was out on the apron, it's called, where all the jets were parked.
Mm,
And during a particular task, I lost some situational awareness and put myself in a situation where I was exposed to operating radar. And at the time, it was at another jet was doing some testing, and I just didn't, lost that awareness. And I had to go and front up to the warrant officer engineering, who was the senior non-commissioned officer for the squadron for maintenance. And we talked about what had happened, and I got a bit of a telling off, obviously, because I put myself in that situation. But he conducted, I guess, that root cause analysis in his head and came up with the action of making me the safety rep for my section. And in the Air Force, we called that being voluntold. So I was voluntold to become the safety rep, and I started going to those safety meetings, conducting inspections, looking at some of the design of our workplace and reducing hazards and things like that. And that's where I got interested and started enjoying it. And I saw that there was a possibility of a different pathway for me. So that's how it started, and I pursued that from there.
nice. Now you've gone through a lot of iterations in your career. It's not a linear one. Um, what's the biggest learning you'd give to your younger self?
Oh, if I could turn back time, I'm sure that's the beauty of hindsight, right? Uh, I think if I was to say to Craig Howell 20 years ago, whatever, don't be so impatient. Things can take time. So that's one of those, and I think I'll probably talk about that later. But you need to gain enough knowledge and skill to have the technical knowledge, but also experience. Experience is so valuable as far as being able to deal with different situations. So, I guess we talk about the it's always greener on the other side of the fence, but that's not always the case. Sometimes you have to make a move for certain situations, and that's okay. But jumping around, there is, it can be detrimental to your skills and to your, if you just look at your CV. I'm sure you see it
Mm,
all the time, John. That's some of those things you look at. And I've always been a bit of a reflective person, is to look at it from a different perspective and say, okay, well, if I was the recruiter, or if I was the manager, or if I was the client looking at this particular piece of paper or CV or whatever, what would I see if I didn't know that, if that's all I had to go off? So, yeah, I think that would be my advice. Don't be so impatient, and make some plans, write them down, put some positives and negatives, and bounce it off some people that you trust, and see what information you get back from. And, it's not about necessarily doing exactly what they say, but it's about getting some advice that then you can make informed decisions on.
Absolutely. I think that's really good advice. I don't think anyone's actually ever said that. And I laugh because I literally caught up with someone the other day, and I was won't say names. I have a lot of time for them, but they're quite young and they've done an amazing job in their career thus far. And it was exactly that. It was without trying to sound patronising, because I know my level of impatience when I was in my starting my
Yeah.
career. The road is long, right? And it's really easy when you're in your 20s to think that, 40 is so far away, or it's really old. Like, it's really not, right? But when you deliver it, it's how you deliver it. Because I'm sure if someone said it to me, I probably wouldn't have listened at that age. And I don't want to sound
Yeah.
patronizing, and that I'm just because I've got all this grey hair in my beard that I know all the answers. But yeah, it's an
Yeah.
interesting piece of advice. So
Yes.
we talk about career journey, right? And you've done that, running a consultancy and going off on your own, working for yourself. It's very different from being an employee. So the big question here is, what motivated you to go off and do that? Right.
Yeah, good question. Uh, so I think I always had that in the back of my mind, was to be able to work for yourself and to have your own consultancy, and that was part of it. I think a longer term plan was, as you get towards retirement, and I'd seen that in FIFO roles, etc., where there was consultants come in and earning good money, but they could pick and choose, and they could make it work for them and go, okay, I'm going to do a couple of weeks work and then be off for a month or whatever it might be. And that could really work in a semi-retired sort of process, or even into retirement. So for me, that was a little way off. I always thought that, to be a consultant, I would need that, all of that skill and experience to go with it, and etc. So now I had, when I'd been doing some oil and gas in Queensland, I was through a consultancy, and so I had my own Pty Limited and a family trust, etc. So I'd already had that on the side there for probably about a decade, where I'd done some part-time work and little projects on the side. So where people might want some documents written and things like that. So like I said, I'd always planned to go down that side, but then, when I felt the time was right. And it was towards the end of 2023. And I was the HSET manager for a gold producer on a FIFO roster. I'd been there just under 3 months, and one of the reasons why I'd been employed was to look at, conduct a gap analysis of the business management systems, and look at the updated legislation and what the company needed to do and whether things were right, whether it was compliant, and point, I guess, the company in the right direction. I did that over that space of a couple of months, and put together my analysis and a fairly significant report, and handed it to my boss, who was the GM, as I was flying out. And a week later, I had a call and a pretty short conversation that said that, my employment was no longer required, and that was pretty well leading into Christmas 2023, or the start of December. And for me, that was again another pivotal moment of, I had already, I guess, it's been a couple of years now that I've known you, John, and we'd had conversations like this before about timing, around that period of where finding other roles slows down. So I already knew that, trying to find another role within a week or something before Christmas was probably not the ideal situation. And even starting a consultancy is not necessarily an ideal situation either. But that's how I came out of that conversation and went, wow, that's just blowing me away. well, I'm going to jump in head first and go full time with my own consultancy. So that was about business development, finding clients, starting to get work. So that's how I started. I'm less than ideal, that's for sure.
What were the, you started going into it there, but what were the sort of the biggest challenges that you didn't expect?
Yeah, well, no, I could talk for a long time on that, but uh, if I break that, yeah, some of the ones that I did not expect was, as a safety professional, you spend 10, 15, 20 years gaining experience, skills, all of your technical safety aspects, especially when you're in salary roles where you are, becoming an advisor, senior advisor, principal, whatever it is, manager, group manager, and you are gaining all of those skills about the technical side of HSE, safety, etc. But
Mm.
you don't often, as you gain that the ladder, I go up the ladder of the corporate rungs, you gain some of that experience in business administration. But when you just jump straight into your own consultancy, there is so much that you are not aware of about the planning and development and executing all of these different things. So if I sort of think of it in context, especially for some of the safety people, practitioners and professionals out there, is that, we see in workplaces where if someone's really good at a job, then quite often they'll be promoted into that supervisor or manager role, but we don't always give them the tools to be that man manager, um,
Mm.
whether it's rostering, pay sheets, managing assets, all of those different things that they may have to do, but have never been given any training in. You just put straight into it. And it's exactly the same with running your own consultancy, except you're looking after marketing strategy, budgets, forecasts, payroll, finding people to work for you. And that's a whole ball game right there, and selecting the right people for what you want to do. Some of the other challenges are you're going from whether it's a 5-day working week to a 7-day working week, having awkward conversations about money. That's always a difficult one when it comes to, getting paid, putting your invoices in and the rest of it. So for me, if I look at my largest challenge right now, it's about finding balance. So um, working in the business or working on the business. Now, there's two very different things, and I know you know what I'm talking about, but other people might not necessarily understand. Although lots of people out there going, "Yeah, I know exactly what you mean." Um, Working in the business is me actually doing work, which I
Mm.
can invoice for, and then working on the business is all of those things about going and finding more work, establishing relationships, meeting new people, doing those administrative tasks that I don't have anyone else to do, which you don't get paid for. And so finding that balance in a small consultancy is about still being able to bring in enough revenue, but being able to find more of it. So yeah, that's one of the biggest challenges I have found, that you can go too far one way and then trying to bring it back the other way is very difficult.
I think it's really refreshing to hear you say that, because it's one of those things that, because you don't necessarily learn all those other things, as a safety professional if you've been in a business, right? Um,
No.
what do you, I guess, briefly, on a lighter note, what do you like about it the most? About working and,
Uh,
from compared to being an embedded full-time employee.
yeah. And look, what do I like about it most? This sounds quite cliche, being the master of your own destiny. I
Mm.
think you at some point in your life you want, whether you've had that role with companies or organizations where you don't agree with how things are being run or decisions being made, etc. Well, you get to make all of those great decisions, but I guess and that's fantastic. But the buck stops with me. If it's a bad
Mm.
decision, well, you'll know about it because you either won't get paid or your client says, "No, I'm not," you're not
Yeah.
getting that work or whatever it might be, right? So, and then there's some of the benefits are you can schedule when to go and meet people and for coffee or lunch or whatever, and you don't have to go and ask someone, but you still have to make that work. So having skills in time management where you now realize that, yeah, you can stop and do that. Um, but that means that you're working tonight or
Yeah,
working over the weekend to deliver on time for your client with a quality product, because that's what you're aiming to do.
yeah. I think that to go back on it before, it's the all encompassing, right? Like it's not necessarily a 40-hour week, and it's very difficult to get that balance, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, you've given some pretty good advice, but I mean, what would you say the biggest piece of advice for anyone? Because look, I get this question a lot, right? And that's why I wanted you to jump on here, because you've
Yeah.
actually done it, and it's not like you've done it like 10 years ago and you've become a major consultancy. It's still new, right? So you
Yes.
and you're still. It's great to see where you're going, but obviously, these learnings are all still fresh for you, which is why it's such great advice to be taken from you. But what is that advice, given that it's fresh?
Don't
For
do
you
it. No, look, no, no,
to...
because it is, look, I will say that it has been some of the most difficult times in my life. And
Hmm.
I'm 51 now, right? So I feel like going through a couple of trades and being in the military and the Air Force and doing a lot of things. Look, my kids are 22 and 20. Um, so there's been some difficult times, but doing this has been one of the most difficult things I've ever done, and I'm still doing it and still learning. But it's also been one of the most rewarding. But if I was to give some advice and look, you've got to take it with a grain of salt, because I'm no massive success here. So I'm still going through that journey, and a lot of people have said to me that I've talked to that at least takes a couple of years before you can feel like there's some success. And I think I've got some success, but there's still a long way to go. So for me, I guess if it was saying to my younger self again, or even just if you were thinking about it, is try and have some potential clients and opportunities lined up before you start. And if you're in that and thinking about it and you don't, then maybe think again and put up with whatever you're doing if it's actually okay. Because if you've got financial or whatever it might be obligations, then yeah, people aren't just going to feel sorry for you and pay you for money
Hmm.
if you don't have those opportunities, right? Have some finances to back it up, because for those months where the opportunities haven't turned into sales, still need to pay the mortgage or pay the rent, put food on the table, or whatever, put fuel in the car, whatever that might be, you whatever it is. Um, Really important one is to establish really good relationships with other consultants, because we're all in the same boat. We don't necessarily have to be competitors. Yes, we are in competition for work, but there is more than enough work out there. Um, and so
Absolutely.
establishing relationships, because you can help them out, and then you're just invoicing them and they pay you,
Yeah.
or vice versa. So that's been really important for me and my success. There's been some people that have really helped me out, and for me, you don't see the importance in it when you're necessarily sitting in that salary role, but putting together a business plan, marketing plan, a strategy that you can execute, finding those channels of revenue and establishing them, so staying within some lanes, identify an area in the market where you can make it work for you, and then above all else, you can put all of that together, but be prepared to scrap the lot, change direction, pivot, adapt, whatever the keyword you want to use, and update your plan. Because there's more than likely you will have to change directions a few times, and adjust to where you thought you were going to be, or what you thought you was going to be a really good channel of revenue. All of a sudden, that's not it. You find it doesn't work. You need to find other
Hmm.
channels. So yeah.
It's Thank you. There's a few things that I've jumped on there around, staying in your niche and how you're speaking to the person that screams that. But the two things for me that I try to say to people that are considering, and you mentioned them as sort of outright, that business development clients, right? Like some of the people that I see succeed the most are the people that already had that big network, that had those relationships as well.
Yeah.
If you are relying, I think if you come off and you go, right, I'm just going to consult back to my old business, and you're a single client business, you're at a huge risk, because that tap can just get
Yeah.
turned off one day. And I guess it's consistently being onto that. And Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing there about having some savings, I think the biggest realization I have when I started business is that nobody pays you in 14 days. That's for sure. And the irony is, as you get better and the companies you work with get bigger, they
Uh,
they pay the worst. They start paying slower and slower, so your cash flow
yeah,
hurts. So I think
yeah.
that's realization until you're in it. But great advice. Um, Look, we'll put the notes, I guess, a link to your LinkedIn. But one last question, and this isn't about consulting. It's what I always finish with, and I always ask. You've gone through multiple iterations as an employee, as a civil servant, as as a soldier, as a part of the ADF and Air Force, an employee, and now working for yourself. You've seen safety across different fields. Um,
Hmm.
where do you see the profession evolving to in the future?
Yeah, another good question. Look, it's definitely changed since I started as a full-time safety practitioner and then into a professional. Oh, but there's so many different directions you can go here. Me personally, my context is, when I was starting out, the the viewpoint was that, you know, the whole officer, I guess, safety officer thing where, especially in the resource sectors here, I'm talking the resource sectors here, is being a legislative requirement where companies had to have safety advisors or whatever on site in some sort of ratio. And so I'm talking about return on investment and value proposition here. So, when they're seen as you just got to have them, and project managers go, oh, yeah, I've got to have some safety guys to meet the contract or whatever it might be, that's not them understanding the value that you can provide. But it's also, there's an onus on us as safety professionals to understand that and be able to do work, put things together, provide information and advice to be able to provide value and return on investment. So that's really important because, we can do all this work, but if you can't measure the success or measure whatever it is you're doing and provide some data on that. And, statistics are great, but you can manipulate them all you want. But return on investment and value, right? So I think that's really important, being able to, and whatever role you're in, whatever you're, whether in consultancy, whatever salary role, you need to be able to provide that information so that people can see some value, and then, being able to then influence in the right areas. So I will get to your question, John, I promise.
Yeah. No,
So,
you've been working for yourself. You're talking about ROI now, right? Come
yeah,
on.
yeah, exactly. But even when you're working for someone else, to be able to provide that to your manager or your group manager or whatever project manager, to be able to provide value so that they take you seriously and include you in a lot of the planning and strategy and things like that that you wouldn't normally be included in. So, yeah, I'll give you an example. Site-based, you're in contract meetings or management meetings on site, and quite often what happens is, right at the start, they do the safety stuff, right? So we talk about incidents and take five numbers and things like that. And then, right, thanks very much. And all safety guys walk out. And me too. I've been in that situation where I walked out, and then they talk about production and all of this other stuff. But so you're not included in that. And so, because they don't feel that you can add value to it. So there's a real practical example, I guess, of where safety has changed over the years to where that doesn't happen as often, where safety professionals are included in a lot of that process because that people that can see value in you being included in facilitating and influencing. But I think personally that, and that's why I am a member and a certified professional with the AIHS, so the Australian Institute in Health and Safety, is I think that being part of a member and a professional organisation, being part of something like that, that's where the organisation can play a part in developing and improving, one, internally, how safety professionals and practitioners learn and network and gain information, but also that they can lobby and be part of developing legislation and improving codes of practice and standards and things like that. That's where I think a professional body can improve the profession as a whole, to where there's a reputation that goes with it. So, I guess the example is looking at engineers and accountants where there's a certification and hopefully there's the reputation and that goes with it. So I guess that's where I think that the safety profession needs to evolve, is to rely and be part of those type of organisations where it can improve as a whole.
I think there's been talk about it for a while, obviously, and it is in other countries, but I think as we move more towards degree qualifications, we talked about before, and the profession evolves, I think that is probably the next logical step, right?
Yeah. And look,
But when is the question, right?
oh yeah,
Who
when.
knows?
And look, I
That's the
don't
million
have all
dollar
the
question.
answers. Yeah, I don't have all the answers, and for me, I have immediate concerns, things that I worry about, which is my consultancy and the rest of it. So, I don't always have the time to be part of a lot of those things, but I love it. It's still motivating, and it motivates me, and I get to meet people and establish more relationships. So it's great.
Well, as I said, we'll put the links there, and you are someone that likes meeting people and establishing relationships. So I'm sure anyone that's thinking about reaching or thinking about consulting, you'd be
Yeah,
happy to chat to. Um,
definitely.
Craig is, as I said, a special guest for a special episode at a special time of the year. So thank you very much for jumping on, and thank you for your insights. As I said, it's a very unique viewpoint that a lot of people don't have, and yeah, thank you for sharing.
Appreciate it. Thanks, John.